Hi, this is Jacqueline Trujillo with your Gallery 1 Art2GO Charcoal Birds Kit. First thing we're going to do is go over our supplies that you're going to see. I'm going to change to my camera. So hold tight. Fantastic. All right, so the first thing you're going to get is an awesome little Gallery 1 sketchbook. Perfect for going out and doing all sorts of sketches. Especially for this project. We are going to be doing birds. So I definitely encourage you to go outside, sit in your backyard, go to the park, and start sketching some birds that you see. Let me show you a quick rundown of some of the ones that I've sketched out real fast, just so you can see it's perfect size for getting a single bird on the page. Okay, you're also going to get a charcoal pencil, which is always important for doing charcoal, so you can get that really nice detail work. You're going to get a little piece of compressed charcoal, which will give you the ability to lay down a lot of material if you'd like to work that way. You're going to get a click eraser, which will be really nice because then it's like using a pencil, but it's an eraser. Really good for getting all those little details worked out. You're going to get a tortillon or a blending stump like this. This is for blending and getting tiny little details softened into the paper, and of course pencil sharpener, which you're always going to need, and paper. And for this kit, we're specifically going to work on toned paper, which means it's not going to be white. It's going to have a certain shade to it. So you're going to get some tan paper. You're also going to get some gray paper. For today's demo, I'm going to show you an example done on gray paper, but I'm also going to show you how to work on the tan paper as well. Okay, so when you are drawing and you draw on normal white paper, we're going to pull up a value scale real quick. So this is just a quick value scale that I sketched out. So I want to go over this specifically because when you use a white piece of paper, the white of your paper is the lightest you can get it. It's not going to get any lighter than that. Everything is built up. This is called additive measure. So all of this is added to the paper. And that makes sense, right? You use your material, you put it onto the paper, and that's where you go. Value scale is how much you can change the material. So this is at its darkest, this is at its lightest. I did an 8-step value scale here. Some of these are a little similar, which happens. Then I'm going to also show you a value scale on toned paper. Okay, now the biggest thing I want you to notice is so they're the same amount of value steps, but I only did 4 in charcoal as opposed to 7 in charcoal. And these 3 have been done with white chalk. And then this is the one I wanted to bring your attention to. This one is the tone of the paper, which does exist in the value scale, just like it does here. But instead of being at the end, it's in the middle somewhere. Okay, so if you're thinking about the whole sheet of paper, it needs to exist somewhere in your drawing. So with working on toned paper, a really helpful tip is to think less is more. If you're not using the tone of the paper, you're missing an entire value step. So if you didn't use any white in your paper, you would be missing this. If you didn't use any of this, you'd be missing this whole value scale. And now in theory and in practice, you can actually get a whole bunch more of charcoal here. But this is pretty standard for what you can get with the white chalk. Okay, we're going to reference these. So if it makes sense to you, draw out a value scale. Okay, just use, any kind of straight edge. Doesn't have to be perfect. You can just even smudge it and see how much material you can get down. And if you can get a nice gradual step. If you squint your eyes down too, and it helps to kind of blend those colors together, that it makes it look a little bit more seamless as opposed to little steps, especially if you were to take it and move away from it. Okay, so we're going to reference that later. This one, because we're not going to be working on white paper, was just to show you the difference. So I'm going to put that one up for now. I'm going to pull out your example first so you can kind of see where we're going to be going with this. So this is on the gray paper. Got a couple of different birds here. I want to show you. So I have attempted to use the entire value scale in each of these birds. In this one, for instance, if we look at it and pull that value scale back in, even though it's gray versus tan, that value is still there. And this is going to be the same if it's going to be on the gray or on the tan. So if I look at this, I can see where I have put the pure charcoal, as dark as it can go, maybe a little step down from there, couple steps of the lighter charcoal, all the way to this really soft, and then the white chalk, right, where it's a little bit lighter here, gets right up to that super bright white that you can get. But then also notice in between, there's that open space, which is that missing value scale that we're definitely need to get in order to achieve a really nice depth with your drawing. Okay, so let's move that away. And for convenience, we're actually going to have the paper cut down for you at a nice manageable size, so that if you want to go out and draw this from nature, you see a bird out there and you're like, I'm going to do a quick sketch of that, then you can take your whole paper out, and then you can put it all together and have almost like a nature journal of all of your drawings of the birds. Okay, but before you get to this, hopefully you've gone out and actually looked and studied some birds. So again, we're going to come back to the sketchbook. Okay, and I just want to show you a couple of these drawings. These are just real quick, but something I want to show you is just a quick basic understanding of how to draw birds. We're going to flip to a nice blank sheet of page. With birds, they can seem kind of complicated, but it doesn't matter what kind of bird it is. They usually have a very similar makeup of their shape, no matter how big or how little. It's just going to change a little bit in how they look. So typically we start with something along the lines of just a really nice basic circle. Okay, that's their head. It's always going to be connected really seamlessly to their body, but we can change that in a little bit. Now, what if we add in the body? And some birds have really big heads and really big bodies. Some have really tiny heads and really big bodies. Okay, maybe that doesn't look like a bird to you yet, but it usually does the moment you put a beak on it. Okay, and then you can start to do some sketches with it, get that shape drawn in. Maybe an eye, definitely need an eye. That's not what birds look like. We're missing some stuff here. So then you need to add in maybe a tail and some little feet and some wings. And there's a quick sketch of a bird. So try doing some of these along with me. Maybe make up your own types of birds, even if they're really quick sketches, like boom, circle, circle, beak, feet, and let's put a tail in there. That's a really quick little sketch of a bird, but I guarantee you nobody would say that that is not a bird. So from there, you can get a little bit more creative. You can get a little bit more specific. Maybe you want to give it some different texture. Maybe it's got some spots on it. Maybe it's got one of those really long tails. Maybe it's like a magpie and it's got a long skinny tail. Let's also look at how you can adapt that into a bird who's flying. Okay, so let's draw a quick little head and a quick little body, and let's add kind of a shape like that. Not quite looking like a bird yet, but that's okay. Let's add a tail. Maybe this one's going out for nice tasty worm. There you go. Get that beak in. And then we just give it some feathers. And then we have a bird in flight. Real quick little sketches. And the more you do of these, the more it makes sense. The more you are familiar with birds and their shapes, and you can kind of just run with it. Okay, so we are going to go do an example that looks similar to this one. Okay, really basic shape. So let's kind of break down this drawing. So we got that circle and the bigger circle. This one's got a real big body, that tail, and then its feet. Okay, this beak is actually looking back towards us, and then we have its eye. So this is the one we're going to do on the toned paper. All right, so let's move forward. All right, so I'm gonna bring back my tan piece of paper. I've got my charcoal. That's all I've used so far because my sketchbook is just white pieces of paper. You don't have to use the chalk. It's actually not gonna show up. It's only gonna show up on a different surface like the gray or the tan. Okay, so if we start with that bird, I'm actually gonna turn it this way. Okay, so let's start with a very general shape of a bird head, just a circle. And I'm trying to keep this nice and light. Notice I'm not really grinding it into my page just because I want to be able to erase part of it out to add that white chalk back in. Okay, and then let's add in that next circle. Although that I wouldn't say that's maybe a circle, more of a potato shape, but add your potato shape on there. Okay, and then you can start to decide where things are going to be changed a little bit. So let's add in that tail. And this one's going to have that little dovetail at the end. Going to sketch out its rest of its wing. Think about the direction of all its little feathers. And then we're going to have it looking back towards us. So I'm going to add in the beak. And I might actually make this beak in chalk. So I'm going to just leave it like that for now. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of a tuck in. So instead of just a straight line, give it a little swirl, just so that it's got more of that beak shape because it's looking back towards us. And put its eye right here. Okay, and its eyes, most birds have just really dark eyes. And then you want to make sure you leave a space for the highlight, which is going to make it look even more depth, and that it's actually out and it's like wet because your eyes are wet and it's going to have more of a shine than any other part of your body, birds included. Okay, let's give it some little feet so it's got somewhere to stand. And let's just add 2 little lines there at the bottom. And like a C shape first. Okay, then we can add in a little claw on that end and a little claw on this end, and then add in that other foot behind it. And then maybe this is just sitting on some kind of post. We'll call that good for that. And now we can start to have some fun and build in that value. So I'm going to make a couple of little shifts here. Because this is kind of like a cardinal type bird, I'm maybe going to add a little bit more of its neck. Maybe it's going to be a little fluffier right here. And let's give it more of a shape to its head. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to do now that I'm at this point is I'm going to erase out where the beak is so that I can add that in white later. Maybe lighten that line a little bit. It's still there, I can still see it, but now I can add chalk over it. Now here's a really important thing to remember when you have your charcoal and your chalk, which I forgot to introduce as part of your kit. Silly me, but you're gonna get a white charcoal pencil too. That's gotta be the other half of the supplies. Okay. So the rule you want to remember is these two, even though they are compatible, which means they work well together, they can also be a little bit, they can kind of fight like siblings, right? So if you want to add the white, make sure there's no charcoal laid down first. Otherwise, it's going to turn into a gray and you won't get that nice pristine white anymore. All right, so for the time being, I'm actually going to leave the chalk pencil out of my reach. I don't want to bother with it just yet because I have so much I can do in charcoal first. All right, so let's add a little depth. Let's put a little bit of some heavy charcoal in this area. And for that, I'm actually going to use my compressed charcoal. I'm going to grind that in really nicely. Maybe there's some other areas like right in here that I want it to be a little darker. Maybe the tip of its tail. And maybe a little up here by its face. And because the rest of it I want to be a little bit more specific, we'll call that good with that charcoal for now. But you can always use it to lay down more material later if you need to. All right, so then let's start cleaning up some of that charcoal. And you'll notice it's going to build up some material on your page. What I like to do is have just an extra piece of paper to my side where I can occasionally lift it up and dust it off instead of blowing on it and it goes everywhere. Unless you're outside, in which case it doesn't matter. But if you're inside, I don't think you're gonna want to have to clean up that big giant charcoal explosion, because charcoal, as fun as it is, as you can already see, it's very messy. But good news is it does come out of clothing. You just gotta definitely let your parent or guardian know right away if you got it into your white shirt. All right. So let's move that down a little bit. Let's kind of just make some adjustments here. I'm going to start first. I'm going to section out a little bit of the eye there. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see. So I just left a small section of it there so that I know that that's where I'm going to put my white charcoal for that highlight. Okay, and then I'm going to fill in the rest. That way I don't forget. And you can see there's a tiny little spot there where I can fill in with white chalk. All right, let's give this bird some texture. So I'm going to use the pencil like little hatch marks and give it to build up in the direction of this little bird's face. And I'm going to call that good. I'm also going to realize that I'm going to put some white up here. So I'm going to lighten this line a little bit as well. It's still there, but now I can go over it with some white chalk without the materials wanting to fight each other. All right, so let's give it a little bit of some shadow underneath its little beak, and maybe a little bit of some scruff underneath its neck. So just giving it a little bit of texture here and there. Okay, I'm also imagining the light is hitting it from this direction so that it's going to be a little darker under here on its little lower belly. So you can actually use your compressed charcoal again, and I'm just going to put a little bit down. I mean, that looks like a pretty good bird already, but we're going to keep going. And I'm going to use my blending stump and just polish that up a little bit. Okay, first thing I'm doing, I'm not worrying about detail, I'm just worrying about value. So the depth that I can reach with this material. Okay, let's add some value down here too, to its tail. Let's just blend that in. If you see that this is close to that lighter value scale, the lighter color on the value scale, so somewhere in here maybe getting closer between these two. Okay. And let's, give it a little bit more blending out in some of these areas. Okay, I want to give this bird some detail in its wing, which is right here. So I think right up in here, I'm going to just do some little stripes, which will just kind of indicate its feathers. And then I can kind of soften those into like rounded points from each other. And then I'm going to do some more down here as well. I do that same, but these ones are just going to be longer. Because birds' wing feathers, they're usually more than one size. You don't just get one solid shape of wing. You can adjust that a little bit. Always little adjustments as you go, just kind of make it look a little bit more like what you want. And this is just a generic bird. It can be, maybe you have birds and you want to draw your own. Maybe you have a bird feeder in your yard and you have reoccurring visitors. Maybe you draw one of them. But again, just the more you draw, the easier it becomes. So let's add a little bit more shaping in there. Let's give it a little bit more of that hatch mark out. So you can see its little face a little bit more. Let's go into its little feet a little bit. Again, back to that C shape. And again, if our light is coming from this way, then we want to have a shadow and a highlight. And the highlight's going to be where the light source is, and the shadow is going to be on the far side. So if we just give it a little bit more definition there, little definition there. Sometimes they've got little spikes on their feet. You can give it a little texture if you'd like to. You know, they've got little talons. You can give it a little talon. Birds have really strong feet and really light bodies. So if you draw it like this and you like it, you can also put it the different way and have it holding onto a branch vertically or horizontally or upside down. They can do that. It's really impressive. They got what looks like real big bodies. They're actually super light, which is how they're able to fly. Okay, so let's keep going. I'm going to lighten this a little bit. It's got a little dark on me. So I'm just going to use my eraser and pull out a little bit of that value, just so that I have that full value scale. Don't want to leave out any section. Notice that I also haven't filled the whole page with value. I still have lots of sections that are just the tone of the page. Let's go back down here, maybe lighten this a little bit. And I'm going to dust off my sheet so I don't get charcoal everywhere. Okay. All right, now let's you know, make sure your pencil is nice and sharp. And we're going to add some texture to the soft, fluffy part of its belly. Okay, so we're going to give it just some lines. And if you just try to keep the right direction with these, you know, they're all going to go in a very similar direction, not the exact same. You can give them a little bit of a curve, a little bit of a curl, and that'll give it some texture. And then I'm going to really give it a nice light touch and then just make some really soft marks just like that. I'm going to erase a little bit of this out too, so I can use just a little bit more chalk. Sometimes if you have a nice light bird, you use a lot more chalk than you do charcoal. If you have a really dark bird, you use more charcoal. It's kind of the beauty of it. You get to use both, and they both create some really nice things. I'm going to start just defining a few areas a little bit more. You can actually, if there's charcoal on the tip of your blending stump, you can use it like a little pencil and use it to kind of build that value in as well. And it's going to just make real soft lines for you. You can use it to almost erase too. These are great little tools for all sorts of artists. Use these with charcoal, chalk, graphite, Conte. Okay, so now I just got a little bit of some texture there. Now, for the sake of fun, let's add some white chalk. I think we're ready. Okay, so let's start with the beak. It's a really important part of that. And I want to make sure it has a nice bright white beak. So, and usually their beaks don't come together perfectly. Sometimes their top part of their beak, like if you think of it as a lip, it goes over the bottom part. So we're going to add that in. And I'm going to leave a little gap in between those so that I can add that nice contrast with the charcoal. Okay, got my super sharp pencil here and add that in. Now I've got that nice bright beak. Okay, while my pencil's still nice and sharp, I'm going to go in and give that highlight in that eye where I had left it. It's already having to take on some nice characteristics. It's looking super bright, looks super realistic. It's got some nice depth. Now let's use the white in this area. Okay, we're gonna, because the sunshine is coming from this direction, it's gonna hit nice and top on the top of this bird's head, where it's getting nice and warm. Okay, starting to bring that in. It's got soft fuzzy head, so I'm going to do that. And the area between the charcoal and the chalk, I'm leaving that tone of the page. So if you can see, I'm going to zoom in a little closer. You can see that I'm not filling it in entirely in chalk or charcoal. I'm leaving some open area. This is where that saying of less is more comes in. Okay, I'm going to erase right in here because I want that sun to also be hitting on the back side of its back. And put in some white chalk. Okay, something like that. Maybe I'm going to give it a little bit more texture in here, some of that white. Kind of thinking about those same hatch marks, just using the different tool to do it. And maybe some little squiggles in here. Again, I'm not going to a point where I'm mixing the chalk and the charcoal. You can, and I definitely encourage you to try some techniques where you do that. But for this one, consider not mixing them. All right, so let's go into this area of the wing. Now that charcoal, if you can see, it's still kind of on the surface. So I'm going to blend it in a little bit so that it doesn't pick up when I use the white chalk. Just going to soften it a little bit. You can see if it's sitting on the surface still, if it's got like little gaps in it. And you can just kind of blend it into the page. All right, now in between these sections of the like black stripes that I added for its wings, I'm going to go in and put some white just so we get that really cool highlighted texture. And I'm not going to put it everywhere, but I'm going to give it in a couple of areas. Give it some texture there. And then let's go back to here on the chest. And again, I'm going to erase a little bit of this out so that I can use the chalk there. Because the sun isn't just coming and hitting it directly in that spot. It's going to illuminate it this way. So it's going to hit this side too. So let's soften that up a little bit. Give it some white. And then let's repeat this similar texture that we have down here by using that white and creating those same marks, those same little lines. Okay, and then let's maybe add a little to the top of its tail so it's got a nice like highlighted area there. And maybe this little underside, a little bit there, and maybe put a little bit in the tail feathers. And then last, let's give it a nice white stump that it's standing on. And give it a little texture with the white. Think about wood, maybe it's standing on a fence post, maybe it's standing on an old stump. And we're just going to give it a little texture just so it's got something. Again, the most important thing about this is the bird, not necessarily what it's standing on, but it is nice to give it a little information. And then let's go in and add that highlight to the feet so that each of those little feet it has that nice highlight that comes around. And it mixed a little bit with the charcoal there, but I don't mind it. It kind of gives it a nice gray, a little bit of a different texture from its feathers. Went through and gave it a little bit of some texture just so that it's got those little bumpy feet. Anything else I want to see? Maybe I want to just define that right there a little bit. Maybe I want to darken that up a little bit. And then the last step, which is really important that you need to do, sign your work and call it good. One bird down. Let's go see how many more we can find. All right, this has been Jacqueline Trujillo with Gallery 1. This is your Art2GO charcoal birds kit. I hope you had as much fun as I did. I really enjoy working on toned paper. That is one of my favorites. Keep drawing, keep practicing. First time may not come as easily as you hope, but you can always hope for the next round to be better. Thanks again. Bye. Host has disabled participant sharing screen. Do you want to start over?